Mm. Hot. Too hot to drink. Still. Okay. Hey, this is chapter 21 of Northanger Abbey, a rare daytime reading of this one. The reason is I'm heading out of town next week to be with my grandparents for a few days, and I want to do the editing while I'm gone. I won't be able to do the recording part, so I'm trying to finish this week. So here we go. Northanger Abbey, chapter 21. Chapter 21. A moment's glance was enough to satisfy Catherine that her apartment was very unlike the one which Henry had endeavored to alarm her by the description of. It was by no means unreasonably large, and contained neither tapestry nor velvet. The walls were papered, the floor was carpeted. The windows were neither less perfect nor more dim than those of the drawing room below. The furniture, though not of the latest fashion, was handsome and comfortable, and the air of the room altogether far from uncheerful. Her heart instantaneously at e- Her heart instantaneously at ease on this point, she resolved to lose no time in particular examination of anything, as she greatly dreaded disobliging the general by any delay. Her habit, therefore, was thrown off with all possible haste, and she was preparing to unpin the linen package which the chaise seat had conveyed for her immediate accommodation, when her eye suddenly fell on a large, high chest, standing back in a deep recess on one side of the fireplace. The sight of it made her start, and forgetting everything else, she stood gazing on it in motionless wonder, while these thoughts crossed her. This is strange indeed. I did not expect such a sight as this. An immense, heavy chest. What can it hold? Why should it be placed here? Pushed back, too, as if meant to be out of sight. I will look into it. Cost me what it may, I will look into it, and directly, too, by daylight. If I stay till evening, my candle may go out. She advanced and examined it closely. It was of cedar, curiously inlaid with some darker wood, and raised about a foot from the ground on a carved stand of the same. The lock, excuse me, the lock was silver, though tarnished from age, and at each end were the imperfect remains of handles, also of silver, broken perhaps prematurely by some strange violence. And on the center of the lid was a mysterious cipher in the same metal. Catherine bent over it intently, but without being to but without being able to distinguish anything with certainty. She could not, in whatever direction she took it, believe the last letter to be a T. And yet, that it should be anything else in that house was a circumstance to raise no common degree of astonishment. If not originally theirs, by what strange events could it have fallen into the Tilney family? Her fearful curiosity was every moment growing greater, and seizing with trembling hands the hasp of the lock, she resolved at all hazards to satisfy herself at least as to its comforts. With difficulty, for something seemed to resist her efforts, she raised the lid a few inches, but at that moment a sudden knocking at the door of the room made her, starting, quit her hold, and the lid closed with alarming violence. This ill-timed intruder was Miss Tilney's maid, sent by her mistress to be of use to Miss Morland, and though Catherine immediately dismissed her, it recalled her to the sense of what she ought to be doing, and forced her, in spite of her anxious desire to penetrate this mystery, to proceed in her dressing without further delay. Her progress was not quick, for her thoughts and eyes were still bent on the object so well calculated to interest and alarm, and though she dared not waste a moment upon a second attempt, she could not remain many paces from the chest. At length, however, having slipped one arm into her gown, her toilette seemed so nearly finished that the impatience of her curiosity might safely be indulged. One moment surely might be spared, and so desperate should be the exertion of her strength that, unless secured by supernatural means, the lid in one moment should be thrown back. With this spirit she sprang forward, and her confidence did not deceive her. Her resolute effort threw back the lid and gave to her astonished eyes the view of a white cotton counterpane, properly folded, reposing at one end of the chest in undisputed possession. She was gazing on it with the first blush of surprise when Miss Tilney, anxious for her friend's being ready, entered the room, and to the rising shame of having harbored for some minutes an absurd expectation, and then added the shame of being caught in so idle a search. "That's a curious "That's a curious old chest, is it not?" said Miss Tilney, as Catherine hastily closed it and turned away to the glass. "It's impossible to say how many generations it's been here. How it came to be how it came to be first put in this room I know not, but I've not had it moved because I thought it sometimes might be of use in holding hats and bonnets. The worst of it is that its weight makes it difficult to the worst of it is that its weight makes it difficult to open. In that corner, however, it's at least out of the way." Catherine had no leisure for speech, being at once blushing, tying her gown, and forming wise resolutions with the most violent dispatch. Miss Tilney Miss Tilney gently hinted her fear of being late, and in half a minute they ran downstairs together in an alarm not wholly unfounded, for General Tilney was pacing the drawing room, his watch in hand, and having, on the very instant of their entering, pulled the bell with violence, ordered, "Dinner to be on the table directly." A little swig of tea. If it's your first time, whether you're live or catching the replay, I record these sessions and then turn them into audiobooks. So if you like classic literature, this is the spot for you. And usually, or not always, but many times, I'll put Southern characters into it. Hot. Still very hot. Still hot, hot, hot. All right. Catherine trembled at the emphasis with which he spoke, and sat pale and breathless, in a most humble mood, concerned for his children, and detesting old chests. And the general, recovering his politeness as he looked at her, spent the rest of his time in scolding his daughter for so foolishly hurrying her fair friend, who was absolutely out of breath from haste, and there was not the least occasion for hurry in the world. But Catherine could not at all get over the double distress of having involved her friend in a lecture and been a great simpleton herself, till they were happily seated at the dinner table, when the general's complacent smiles and a good appetite of her own restored her to peace. The dining parlor was a noble room, suitable in its dimensions to a much larger drawing room than the one in common use, and fitted up in a style of luxury and expense which was almost lost on the unpractised eye of Catherine, who saw little more than its spaciousness and the number of their attendants. Of the former she spoke aloud her admiration, and the general, with a very gracious countenance, acknowledged that it was by no means an ill-sized room, and further confessed that though as careless on such subjects as most people, he did not look upon a tolerably large eating room as one of the necessaries of life. He supposed, however, that she must have been used to much better sized apartments at Mr. Allen's. "No, indeed," was Catherine's honest assurance. "Mr. Allen's dining parlor was not more than half as large," and she had never seen so large a room as this in her life. The general's good humor increased. Why, as he had such rooms, he thought he'd be simple not to make use of them, but upon his honor he believed there might be more comfort in rooms of only half their size. Mr. Allen's house, he was sure, must be exactly of the true size for rational happiness. The evening passed without any further disturbance, and in the occasional absence of General Tilney, with much positive cheerfulness. It was only in his presence that Catherine felt the smallest fatigue from her journey, and even then, even in moments of languor or restraint, a sense of general happiness preponderated, and she could not think of her friends in Bath without one wish of being with them. The night was stormy. The wind had been rising at intervals the whole afternoon, and by the time the party broke up, it blew and rained violently. Catherine, as she crossed the hall, listened to the tempest with sensations of awe, and when she heard it rage round a corner of the ancient building and close with sudden fury a distant door, felt for the first time that she was really in an out that she was re- felt for the first time that she was really in an abbey. Yes, these were characteristic sounds. They brought her to recollection. They brought to her recollection a countless variety of dreadful situations and horrid scenes which such buildings had witnessed and such storms ushered in, and most heartily did she rejoice in the happier circumstances attending her entrance within walls so solemn. She had nothing to dread from midnight assassins or drunken gallants. Henry had certainly been only in jest in what he had told her that morning. In a house so furnished and so guarded, she could have nothing to explore or to suffer, and might go to her bedroom as securely as if it had been her own chamber at Fullerton. Thus wisely, thus wisely fortifying her mind as she proceeded upstairs, she was enabled, especially on perceiving that Miss Tilney slept only 2 doors from her, to enter her room with a tolerably stout heart, and her spirits were immediately assisted by the cheerful blaze of a wood fire. "How much better is this?" said she as she walked to the fender. "How much better to find a fire ready lit than to have than to have it than to have to wait shivering in the cold till all the family are in bed, as so many poor girls have been obliged to do, and then to have a faithful old servant frightening one by coming in with a faggot. How glad I am that Norther how glad I am that Northanger is what it is. If it had been if it had been like some other places, I do not know that. I do not know that in such a night as this I could have answered for my courage. But now, to be sure, there is nothing to alarm one." Let's see. She turned around the room. The window curtains seemed in motion. It could be nothing but the violence of the wind penetrating through the divisions of the shutters, and she stepped boldly forward, carelessly humming a tune to assure herself of its being so, peeped, cur- peeped, courage- peeped courageously behind each curtain, saw nothing on either low window seat to scare her, and on placing a hand against the shutter, felt the strongest conviction of the wind's force. A glance at the old chest, as she turned away from this examination, was not without its use. She scorned the causeless fears of an idle fancy, and began with a most happy indifference to prepare herself for bed. She should take her time. She should not hurry herself. She should not care if she were the last person up in the house. But she would not make up her fire. That would seem cowardly, as if she wished for the protection of light after she were in bed. The fire, therefore, died away, and Catherine, having spent the best part of an hour in her arrangements, was beginning to think of stepping into bed, when, on giving a parting glance around the room, she was struck by the appearance of a high, old-fashioned black cabinet, which, though in a situation conspicuous enough, had never caught her notice before. Henry's words, his description of the ebony cabinet, which was to escape her observation at first, immediately rushed across her, and though there could be nothing really in it, there was something whimsical. It was certainly a very remarkable coincidence. She took her candle and looked closely at the cabinet. It was not absolutely it was not absolutely ebony and gold, but it was Japan, black and yellow Japan of the handsomest kind. And as she held her candle, the yellow had very much the effect of gold. The key was in the door, and she had a strange fancy to look into it. Not, however, with the smallest expectation of finding anything. But it was so very odd, after what Henry had said, in short, that she could not sleep till she had examined it. So, placing the candle with great caution on a chair, she seized the key with a very tremulous hand and tried to turn it. But it resisted her utmost strength. Alarmed, but not discouraged, she tried it another way. A bolt flew, and she believed herself successful. But how strangely mysterious! The door was still immovable. She paused a moment in breathless wonder. The wind roared down the chimney. The rain beat in torrents against the windows, and everything seemed to speak the awfulness of her situation. To retire to bed, however, unsatisfied on such a point, would be vain, since sleep must be impossible with the consciousness of a cabinet so mysteriously closed in her immediate vicinity. Again, therefore, she applied herself to the key, and after moving it in every possible way for some instants with the determined celerity of hope's last effort, the door suddenly yielded to her hand. Her heart leaped with exultation at such a victory, and having thrown open each folding door, the second being secured only by bolts of less wonderful construction than the lock, though in her eye, though in that her eye could not, though in that her eye could not discern anything Though in that her eye could not discern anything unusual, a double range of small drawers appeared in view, with some larger drawers above and below them, and in the center a small door, closed also with a lock and key, secured in all probability a cavity of importance. Catherine's heart beat quick, but her courage did not fail her. With a cheek flushed by hope and an eye straining with curiosity, her fingers grasped the handle of a drawer and drew it forth. It was entirely empty. With less alarm and greater eagerness, she seized a second, a third, a fourth. Each was equally empty. Not one was left unsearched, and in not one was anything found. Well read in the art of concealing a treasure, the possibility of false linings to the drawers did not escape her, and she felt round each one with anxious acuteness in vain. The place in the middle alone remained now unexplored, and though she had never from the first had the smallest idea of finding anything in any part of the cabinet, and was not in the least disappointed at her ill success thus far, it would be foolish not to examine it thoroughly while she was about it. It was some time, however, before she could unfasten the door, the same difficulty occurring in the management of this inner lock as of the outer, but at length it did open, and not in vain, as hitherto was her search. Her quick eyes fell directly on a roll of paper pushed back into the further part of the cavity, apparently for concealment, and her feelings at the moment were indescribable. Her heart fluttered, her knees trembled, and her cheeks grew pale. She seized with an unsteady hand the precious manuscript. For half a glance sufficed to ascertain written characters, and while she acknowledged with awful sensations this striking exemplification of what Henry had foretold, resolved instantly to peruse every line before she attempted to rest. Getting on towards the end of the chapter here. Man, I need to take the lid off of that. That's what I'm going to do. You know what? I don't want to spell it. Okay. Almost done. The dimness of the light her candle emitted made her turn to it with alarm, and there was no danger of its sudden extinction. It had yet some hours to burn, and that she might not have any greater difficulty in distinguishing the writing than what its ancient date might occasion, she hastily snuffed it. Alas, it was snuffed and extinguished in one. A lamp could not have expired with more awful effect. Catherine, for a few moments, was motionless with horror. It was done completely. Not a remnant of light in the wick could have given hope to the rekindling breath. Darkness, impenetrable and immovable, filled the room. A violent gust of wind, rising with sudden fury, added fresh horror to the moment. Catherine trembled from head to foot. In the pause which succeeded, a sound like receding footsteps and the closing of a distant door struck on her affrighted ear. Human nature could support no more. A cold sweat stood on her forehead. The manuscript fell from her hand, and groping her way to bed, she jumped hastily in and sought some suspensions of agony by creeping far underneath the clothes. To close her eyes and sleep that night, she felt must be entirely out of the question. With a curiosity so justly awakened, and feelings in every way so agitated, repose must be absolutely impossible. The storm too abroad so dreadful. She had not been used to feel alarm from the wind, but now every blast seemed fraught with awful intelligence. The manuscript so wonderfully found, so wonderfully accomplishing the morning's prediction, how was it to be accounted for? What could it contain? To whom could it relate? By what means could it be so long concealed? And how singularly strange that it should fall to her lot to discover it. Till she had made herself mistress of its contents, however, she could have neither repose nor comfort, and with the sun's first rays she was determined to peruse it. But many were the tedious hours which must yet intervene. She shuddered, tossed about in her bed, and envied every quiet sleeper. The storm still raged, and various were the noises, more terrific even than the wind, which struck at intervals on her startled ear. The very curtains of her bed seemed at one moment in motion, and at another the lock of her door was agitated, as if by The very curtains of her bed seemed at one moment in motion, and at another the lock of her door was agitated, as if by the attempt of somebody to enter. Hollow murmurs seemed to creep along the gallery, and more than once her blood was chilled by the sound of distant moans. Airplane passing overhead. Hour after hour passed away, and the wearied Catherine had heard three proclaimed by all the clocks in the house before the tempest subsided or she unknowingly fell fast asleep. That was chapter 21. I'll try to do chapter 22 here. Chapter 22. The housemaid's folding back her window shutters at 8 o'clock the next morning was the sound which first roused Catherine. She opened her eyes, wondering that they could have ever been closed on objects of cheerfulness. Her fire was already burning, and a bright morning had succeeded the tempest of the night. Instantaneously, with the consciousness of existence, returned her recollection of the manuscript, and springing from the bed in the very moment of the maid's going away, she eagerly collected every scattered sheet which had burst from the roll on its falling to the ground, and flew back to enjoy the luxury of their perusal on her pillow. She now plainly saw that she must not expect a manuscript of equal length with the generality of what she had shuddered over in books, for the roll, seeming to consist entirely of small disjointed sheets, was altogether but of trifling size, and much less than she had supposed it to be at first. Her greedy eye glanced rapidly over a page. She started at its import. Could it be possible? Or did not her nerves play her false? Or did not her senses play her false? An inventory of linen, in coarse and modern characters, seemed all that was before her. If the evidence of sight might be trusted, she held a washing bill in her hand. She seized another sheet and saw the same articles, with little variation. A third, a fourth, and a fifth presented nothing new. Shirts, stockings, cravats, and waistcoats faced her in each. Two others, penned by the same hand, marked an expenditure scarcely more interesting. In letters, hair powder, shoestring, and breeches ball. And the larger sheet, which had enclosed the rest, seemed by its first cramped line to poultice chestnut mare, a farrier's bill. Such was the recollection of papers left perhaps as she could then suppose by the negligence of a servant in the place where she had taken them, which had filled her with an expectation and alarm, and robbed her of half her night's sleep. She felt humbled to the dust. Could not the adventure of the chest have taught her wisdom? A corner of it, catching her eye as she lay, seemed to rise up in judgment against her. Nothing could now be clearer than the absurdity of her recent fancies. To suppose that a manuscript of many generations back could have remained undiscovered in a room such as that, so modern, so habitable, or that she should be the first to possess the skill of unlocking a cabinet the key of which was open to all. How could she have so imposed on herself? Heaven forbid that Henry Tilney should ever know her folly. And it was in a great measure his own doing, for had not the cabinet appeared so exactly to agree with his description of her adventures, she could never have felt the smallest curiosity about it. This was the only comfort that occurred. Impatient to get rid of those hateful evidences of her folly, those detestable papers then scattered over the bed, she rose directly, and folding them up as nearly as possible in the same shape as before, returned them to the same spot within the cabinet, with a very hearty wish that no untoward accident might ever bring them forward again to disgrace her even with herself. Why the lock should have been so difficult to open, however, was still something remarkable, for she could now manage them with perfect ease. In this there was surely something mysterious, and she indulged in the flattering suggestion for half a minute, till the possibility of the doors having been at first unlocked, and of being herself its fastener, darted into her head and cost her another blush. She got away as soon as she could from a room in which her conduct produced such unpleasant reflections, and found her way with all speed to the breakfast parlor, as it had been pointed out to her by Miss Tilney the evening before. Henry alone Henry was alone in it, and his immediate hope of her having been undisturbed by the tempest, with an arch reference to the character of the buildings they inhabited, was rather distressing. For the world she would not have her weakness suspected, and yet, unequal to an absolute falsehood, was constrained to acknowledge that the wind had kept her awake a little. "But we have a charming morning after it," she added, desiring to get rid of the subject, "and storms and sleeplessness are nothing when they're over. What beautiful hyacinths! I have just learnt to love a hyacinth." "And how might you learn? By accident or argument?" "Your sister taught me. I cannot tell how. Mrs. Allen used to take pains year after year to make me like 'em, but I never could, till I saw 'em the other day in Milsom Street. I'm naturally indifferent about flowers." "But now you love a hyacinth." "So much the better. You gained a new source of enjoyment, and it's as well to have as many holds upon happiness as possible. Besides, a taste for flowers is always desirable in your sex, as a meaning of getting you out of doors and tempting you to more frequent exercise than you would otherwise take. And though the love of a hyacinth may be rather domestic, who can tell, the sentiment once raised, but you may in time come to love a rose." "But I do not want any pursuit to get me out of doors. The pleasure of walking and breathing air is enough for me, and in fine weather I am out more than half my time. Mamma says I am never within. At any rate, however, I'm pleased that you've learnt to love a hyacinth. The mere habit of learning to love is the thing, and a teachableness of disposition in a young lady is a great blessing. Has my sister a pleasant mode of instruction?" Catherine was saved the embarrassment of attempting an answer by the entrance of the general, whose smiling compliments announced a happy state of mind, but whose gentle hint of sympathetic early rising did not advance her composure. The elegance of the breakfast forced her. Other airplane. The elegance of the breakfast set forced itself on Catherine's notice when they were seated at table, and lucidly it had been the general's choice. Excuse me. He was enchanted by her approbation of his taste, confessed it to be neat and simple, thought it right to encourage the manufacture of his country, and for his part, to his uncritical palate, the tea was well flavored from the clay of Staffordshire, as from that of Dresden or Save. I don't know. As from that of Dresden or Save. But it was quite an old set, purchased 2 years ago. The manufacture was much improved since that time. He had seen some beautiful specimens when last in town, and he had not been perfectly without vanity of that and had he not been perfectly without vanity of that kind, might have been tempted to order a new set. He trusted, however, that an opportunity might ere long occur of selecting one, though not for himself. Catherine was probably the only one of the party who did not understand him. Shortly after breakfast, Henry left them for Woodston, where business required that would keep him 2 or 3 days. They all attended in the hall to see him mount his horse, and immediately on re-entering the breakfast room, Catherine walked to a window in hope of catching another glimpse of his figure. "This is a somewhat heavy call upon your brother's fortitude," observed the general to Eleanor. Woodston will make but a sombre appearance today." "Is it a pretty place?" asked Catherine. What say you, Eleanor? What say you, Eleanor? Speak your opinion, for ladies can best tell the taste of ladies in regards to places as well as men. I think it would be acknowledged by the most impartial eye to have many recommendations. The house stands among fine meadows facing the southeast, with an excellent kitchen garden in the same aspect. The walls surrounding it, which I built and stocked myself about 10 years ago for the benefit of my son. It's a family living, Miss Moreland, and the property in the place being chiefly my own, you may believe I take care that it shall not be a bad one. Did Henry's income depend solely on his living, he would not be ill provided for. Perhaps it may seem odd that with only two younger children I should think any profession necessary for him, and certainly there are moments when we could all wish him to be disengaged from every tie of business. But though I may not exactly make converts of you young ladies, I am sure your father, Miss Morland, would agree with me in thinking it expedient to give every young man some employment. The money's nothing, it's not an object, but employment is the thing. Even Frederick, my eldest son, you see, who will perhaps inherit as considerable a landed property as any private man in the country, has his profession. The imposing effect of this last argument was equal to his wishes. The silence of the lady proved it to be unanswerable. Something had been said the evening before of her own Something had been said the evening before of her being shown over the house, and he now offered himself as her conductor. And though Catherine had hoped to explore it unaccompanied only by his daughter, and though Catherine had hoped to explore it accompanied only by his daughter, it was a proposal of too much happiness in itself, under any circumstances, not to be gladly accepted. For had she been already 18 hours for she had been already 18 hours in the Abbey and had seen only a few of its rooms. The netting box, just leisurely drawn forth, was closed with joyful haste, and she was ready to attend him in a moment. And when they had gone over the house, he promised himself, moreover, the pleasure of accompanying her into the shrubberies and garden. She curtsied her acquiescence. But perhaps it might be more agreeable to her to make those her first object. The weather was at present favorable, and at this time of year the uncertainty was very great of its continuance so. Which would she prefer? He was equally at her service. Which did his daughter think would most accord with her fair friend's wishes? But he thought he could discern. Yes, he certainly read in Miss Morland's eyes a judicious desire of making use of the present smiling weather. But when did she judge amiss? The Abbey would be always safe and dry. He yielded implicitly, and would fetch his hat and attend them in a moment. He left the room, and Catherine, with a disappointed, anxious face, began to speak of her unwillingness that she should be taking them out of doors against his own inclination, under a mistaken idea of pleasing her. But she was stopped by Miss Tilney's saying, with a little confusion, "I believe it'll be wisest to take the morning while it's so fine, and do not be uneasy on my father's account. He always walks out at this time of day." Catherine did not exactly know how this was to be understood. Why was Miss Tilney embarrassed? Could there be any unwillingness on the general's side to show her over the Abbey? The proposal was his own, and was not it odd that he should always take his walk so early? Neither her father nor Mr. Allen did so. It was certainly very provoking. She was all impatience to see the house, and had scarcely any curiosity about the grounds. If Henry had been with them indeed. But now she should not know what was picturesque when she saw it. Such were her thoughts, but she kept them to herself, and put on her bonnet in patient discontent. She was struck, however, beyond her expectation by the grandeur of the Abbey, as she saw it for the first time from the lawn. The whole building enclosed a large court, and two sides of the quadrangle, rich in Gothic ornaments, stood forward for admiration. The remainder was shut off by knolls of old trees or luxuriant plantations, and the steep woody hills rising behind to give it shelter were beautiful even in the leafless month of March. Catherine had seen nothing to compare with it, and her feelings of delight were so strong that without waiting for any better authority, she boldly burst forth in wonder and praise. The general listened with assenting gratitude, and it seemed as if his own estimation of Northanger had waited unfixed till that hour. The kitchen garden was next to be admired, and he led the way to it across a small portion of the park. The number of acres contained in this garden was such as Catherine could not listen to without dismay, being more than double the extent of all Mr. Allen's as well as her father's, including churchyard and orchard. The walls seemed countless in number, endless in length. A village of hothouses seemed to arise from them, and a whole parish to be at work within the enclosure. The general was flattered by her looks of surprise, which told him almost as plainly, as he soon forced her to tell him in words, that she had never seen any gardens at all equal to them before, and he then modestly owned that, without any ambition of that himself, without any solicitude about it, he did believe them to be unrivaled in the kingdom. If he had a hobby horse, it was that. He loved a garden. Though careless enough in most matters of eating, he loved good fruit, or if he did not, his children and friends did. There were great vexations, however, attending such a garden as his. The utmost care could not always secure the most valuable fruits. The pinery had yielded only 100 in the last year. Mr. Allen, he supposed, must feel these inconveniences as well as himself. No, not at all. Mr. Allen did not care about the garden and never went into it. With a triumphant smile of satisfaction, the general wished he could do the same, for he never entered his without being vexed in some way or other by its falling short of his plan. How were Mr. Allen's succession houses worked? Describing the nature of his own as he entered them. Mr. Allen had only one small hothouse, which Mrs. Allen had the use of her plants for, and which Mrs. Allen had the use of for her plants in winter, and there was a fire in it now and then. He's a happy man, said the general, with a look of very happy contempt. Having taken her into every division and led her under every wall till she was heartily weary of seeing and wondering, he suffered the girls at last to seize the advantage of an outer door, and then, expressing his wish to examine the effect of some recent alterations about the tea-house, proposed it as no unpleasant extension of their walk, if Miss Moreland were not tired. But where are you going, Eleanor? Why do you not choose that cold, damp path to it? Miss Moreland will get wet. Why do you choose that cold, damp path to it? Miss Moreland will get wet. Our best way is across the park. This is so favorite a walk of mine, said Miss Tilney, that I always think it the best and nearest way, but perhaps it may be damp. It was a narrow, winding path through a thick grove of old Scotch firs, and Catherine, struck by its gloomy aspect and eager to enter it, could not, even by the general's disapprobation, be kept from stepping forward. He perceived her inclination, and having again urged the plea of health in vain, was too polite to make further opposition. She excused himself, however, from attending them. The rays of the sun were not too cheerful for him, and he would meet them by another course. He turned away, and Catherine was shocked to find how much her spirits were relieved by the separation. The shock, however, being less real than the relief, offered it no injury, and she began to talk with easy gaiety of the delightful melancholy which such a grove inspired. I'm particularly fond of this spot, said her companion with a sigh. It was my mother's favorite walk. Catherine had never heard Mrs. Tilney mentioned in the family before, and the interest excited by this tender remembrance showed itself directly in her altered countenance and in the attentive pause with which she waited for something more. I used to walk here so often with her, added Eleanor, though I never loved it then as I have loved it since. At that time, indeed, I used to wonder at her choice, but her memory endears it now. And ought it not, reflected Catherine, to endear it to her husband? Yet the general would not enter it. Miss Tilney, continuing silent, she ventured to say, her death must have been a great affliction. A great and increasing one, replied the other in a low voice. I was only 13 when it happened, and though I felt my loss perhaps as strongly as one so young could feel it, I could not then know what a loss it was. She stopped for a moment, and then added with great firmness, I have no sister, you know, and though my brothers are very affectionate, and Henry is a great deal here, which I'm most thankful for, it's impossible for me not to be often solitary. To be sure, you must miss him very much. A mother would have always been present. A mother would have been a constant friend. Her influence would have been beyond all other. Was she a very charming woman? Was she handsome? Was there any picture of her in the Abbey? And why had she been so partial to that grove? Was it from dejection of spirits? Were questions now eagerly poured forth. The first three received a ready affirmative. The two others were passed by, and Catherine's interest in the deceased Mrs. Tilney augmented with every question, whether answered or not. Of her unhappiness in marriage she felt persuaded. The general certainly had been an unkind husband. He did not love her walk. Could he therefore have loved her? And besides, handsome as he was, there was something in the turn of his features which spoke his not having behaved well to her. Her picture, I suppose, blushing at the consummate art of her own question, hangs in your father's room? No, it was intended for the drawing room, but my father was dissatisfied with the painting, and for some time it had no place. Soon after her death, I obtained it for my own and hung it in my bedchamber, where I shall be happy to show it to you. It's very like, here is another proof, a portrait, very like, of a departed wife, not valued by the husband. He must have been dreadfully cruel to her. Catherine attempted no longer to hide herself from the nature of the feelings which, in spite of all his attentions, he had previously excited. And what had been terror and dislike before was now absolute aversion. Yes, aversion. His cruelty to such a charming woman made him odious to her. She had often read of such characters which Mr. Allen had been used to call unnatural and overdrawn, but here was proof positive of the contrary. She had just settled this point when the end of the path brought them directly upon the general, and in spite of all her virtuous indignation, she found herself again obliged to walk with him, listen to him, and even to smile when he smiled. Being no longer able, however, to receive pleasure from the surrounding objects, she soon began to walk with lassitude. The general perceived it, and with a concern for her health, which seemed to reproach her for her opinion of him, was most urgent for returning with his daughter to the house. He would follow them in a quarter of an hour. Again they parted, but Eleanor was called back in half a minute to receive a strict charge against taking her friend round the Abbey till his return. This second instance of his anxiety to delay what she so much wished for struck Catherine as very remarkable. All right, that was chapter 22. So whether you're live or catching the replay, thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't. Like the video if you would, and I will see you very soon.